Welcome to Live Decoded. Today I'm joined by Ashley Mosaic. What's the history behind her name and what does it mean to be a futurist and impact strategist? Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Likewise, I think we have a lot to talk today about because you helped multiple startups, businesses to transform actually their business and get better in every single aspect. All that while mixing modern approaches with ancient ones. And can't wait to go deep in that. Do you want to get into detail how you came to this point? What was your way through life?
Well, from a very young age, I was always just fascinated with the universe. And I would ask lots of questions. I never really took anything as just like, oh, that's the way it is and that's it. I was like, there's got to be more to that. There's got to be a different way. There's got to be a better way. I'm not just going to accept that. So this is like insatiable curiosity, and this quest for, you can call truth, was something that just really moved me, and I was extremely motivated by that. And this just led me through several decades of learning certain modalities, fusing them with other modalities, creating new systems. Started with first studying things like different religions, and then studying things like manifestation, and then quantum physics, and then getting deeper into astrology, and then fusing astrology with these other systems. And because I always wanted to know why and what do we do about this. And also something I noticed was I always had this ability to kind of see how things were going to become together in ways that I didn't consciously understand. So there was a period of my life when I was like, no, am I psychic or something? I don't know if I feel good about that. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I kind of came to the realization of, oh, I understand like how I'm able to piece these pieces together into things that we can all do. But there's frameworks and there's different systems that help us come to these conclusions quicker.
How old have you been when you first realized that you're just overly curious about this stuff?
I mean, as long as I can remember.
Okay.
As long as I can remember. I would even, from very young age, I think most kids are fascinated with stars and, the galaxies and all of that, but I was just fascinated by that and fascinated with science, but then fascinated with art. I mean, very young age. Like, I also remember asking really deep questions when I was around like 3 years old, asking, just like, wanted to know more of the components behind things like maybe like meat and things like that, because I was like, it's not sitting right with me, and I always just had this understanding that there was more to maybe what we're being told. And so this is long as I can remember. I don't know if that's necessarily a good or bad thing, but it's definitely been something that is I've just been like this insatiable curiosity.
So you would say you're just born with it. And
I think so. I think I really was. I was very curious and deeply sensitive, and that's something that can be a combination that can lead people to do great things or to have some challenges as well. So I had to learn through lots of trial and errors of how to want the truth, but also have a deep level of empathy that can lead you to uncover some stones that you're like, oh, I don't know if I necessarily want that truth. But what do people say? That at first the truth will piss you off, then it will set you free. So
okay. So
what I've heard.
What is actually the story behind your surname, Mosaic?
So it was in 2020. I had a pretty big, I'm going to say it's one of those dark night of the souls. I had a lot of things come to the surface. A lot of things all of a sudden showed me where I was not attuned to the future that I was desiring. I was not attuned to the future that I was consciously moving towards. And I had this big realization of where I want to allow for all of me to come forward. I want for all of me to be able to have this sense of identity and be able to have this sense of self and be of service from this more, what I realize now is truly this more multifaceted, multi-dimensional aspect, not just somebody who maybe, you're known for this, but instead all of us, we have so many different components of ourselves. Nobody just does one thing. And it's when we hyperfixate on trying to really niche ourselves down, I think that is something that a lot of people struggle with because they realize in this refinement process, they unknowingly cut out some pretty important pieces of themselves. And that was a real big part of my journey was I realized I thought that I was a sovereign individual. I thought that I was living in a way where I was really aligned with also the future and these future trends. But I had a lot of blind spots and a lot of things that I was not focusing on that ended up creating situations and problems for myself. So it was really allowing for myself to just be multifaceted, be multidimensional, and be somebody that's able to hold the two different sides of this stick, right? Be strategic and spiritual, be multiple sides. And yeah, that's what Mosaic came about. And I really wanted a name that really encapsulated that. And that came to me and I ran with it. And it's been something that's felt like a sense of ownership over myself and my life, and it's felt really powerful.
Wow, good for you. When we talk about some people cutting things out, and you have an expertise in future trends and what's going on right now, and of course there is social media, and everybody is just comparing themselves over and over again to others. Do you think this is the main reason why so many people don't think their last exam or the last major, the last bachelor, whatsoever, is that exciting? Because they see all those exciting lives every single day on their smartphones, and their normal life, in quotes, isn't that interesting anymore, maybe, in comparison, and that's why they don't put it on their flag?
Well, I think it's one thing when people, we forget that when we are looking at people's lives on social media, that people, for the most part, they're sharing their highlight reel. They're sharing their most exciting things. They're sharing the photo, in a landmark location, something that is going to actually be engaging. So we've very much been in this attention economy where we just want eyeballs, we want people to see. It's not so much about the depth and the meaning behind things as much as it is about the initial, the hook, the clickbait, the flashy, almost like the eye candy. And it's similar to, if you were to, instead of eating dinner, you just ate candy, you would not feel well, and you would feel void of actual sustenance. And that's something that I think many of our souls have been experiencing when we're like, what is the actual meaning here? Like, this is fake. Nobody, it doesn't fill you up in that way. So that's one component of it. But then there's also the idea that we are moving out of a more homogenized society where in many ways, we have been conditioned to believe that there is a right way to be, and then there's varying not right ways to be, and we're almost attempting to model our life and our success after somebody else. So there's also this feeling of like the puzzle piece doesn't quite feel right, and so it's like you're trying to contort yourself, and then you're like, am I happy yet? Am I happy yet? Am I happy yet? And you're like, no, this is not what it is I want to be doing. I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel these ways that I thought that I was supposed to feel. And we're moving out of that more homogenized into one that is more deeply individual, where it actually is about being your authentic self. So what looks right for one person isn't going to look right for the next person. And so it's really about how do we come home to ourselves, and how do we get clear on how to make decisions according to what is actually right for us, and not necessarily from an intellectual, right? Because just like AI, our minds can be hijacked. but this deeper body's intelligence, this deeper intuitive knowing, and almost this emotional attunement that we can have. And it's our own way, though. So it's really about how do we come home to ourselves. And that's where the work that I do with businesses and individuals is because, okay, what's the way to do that? And I'm like, oh, we got a whole bunch of different ways. But it's about finding what works for you and what actually allows for you to feel a sense of at home and at ease and at peace with yourself.
When I think about that you try to fit in whenever with everything you see every single day, it's just so hard. Especially when I look into at some of my friends, it happens quite a lot these days that someone has a view on something, and when you ask them about that view, about their perspective, the first thing they are saying, yeah, I saw it on TikTok yesterday. And that's why he had all of this evidence, and that's that. It's just, we believe him, he's the one. And of course, everybody on social media has their own mission, and most of the times it's the mission to captivate the viewer and give your opinion to them. And I think that is maybe one of the biggest problems with it. And this makes it just so hard for everybody, because we all want to fit in, because nobody of us wants to be alone. And then you have all of those different opinions every single swipe, and you need to decide which one fits your ideology maybe the best, but it will never be 100% your own. I don't say only because you hear an opinion from someone else it can't be your opinion as well, but you really need to be able to at least explain your opinion in a deeper way than, yeah, I saw it on TikTok or on Instagram. And I see myself and friends struggle with that a lot. So what could we do against that?
One thing is understanding that there are so many different factors within the way our brain works that are designed to keep us safe. And safe is familiarity. So a lot of people will be boxed in by our thought processes, by our ideas, and also we'll have confirmation bias. There's a ton of research out there showing that there's something in the brain called the reticular activating system. And essentially it is that there is something, I forget what the exact number is now, but say there's like 11 million bits of data like coming at us in any moment in time, we can consciously only perceive of between like around 60 of those. So we are going to perceive of those bits of information based on what already fits in with what we know to be true. And there is a certain level of efficiency in that, right? I mean, imagine if every single second was like your first second on Earth. We wouldn't be able to get anything done. But we have to be mindful of that, of, confirmation bias, or, I was actually programmed to notice that, and then so it's more likely then that I'm going to already be viewing everything through the lens of that. So then we're very quick to be like, that's not what I think, so I'm going to shut it down. Versus be able to kind of just tune in a little bit more to even just allow for a few more bits of data to come in. And also a lot of times we have a tendency to feel a lack of safety when we feel as though an ideology is being threatened. So it's important for us to recognize that we are not our beliefs, we are not our thoughts, and just like anything, when given new information, it's a sign of emotional intelligence, a sign of various types of intelligence to be able to be like, never thought of it that way. They're like, given new information allows for you to accommodate new ideas and maybe even new truths.
But that is actually quite hard, because something I actually recently learned in the last 2 weeks is that we are not the masters over our beliefs, really. There's this 4-step guide. First, there's the evidence for instance, I know this bottle of water is here and it is filled with water, and that is what I believe. And then there is how much you believe into the evidence, how much it really says, and because it's real, it says a lot. And the only way to change that belief is to give new evidence that has a stronger weight than the evidence that I already have. And when you have the social media, like you said, you will only see the things that resonate with your own opinion, your own ideology. And it will be hard to just go, I never thought about it that way, when you heard or hear about another opinion for the first time, because you have all this evidence that you just swiped through a complete hour of doom scrolling, and you had all of those people telling you that your opinion is the only one, and all of this evidence, you accumulated it, and then there is somebody on the street saying you are wrong and here's why. And
Well, yeah, it feels unsafe. I mean, I can think
yeah.
of that as I remember when I was very young and I found out the truth about Santa Claus, and I was like,
Yeah.
maybe I want to be lied to. Maybe I don't like. And then I felt this. Went through this whole process of like feeling all these feelings about it, and I imagine that on some level, that is the same thing that young adults and adults of various ages they go through on a. And it's different, but I think it's pulling on something similar there. That as long as we know something, we understand something, there's safety in that. But as soon
Yeah.
as our version of truth is twisted upside down, or we see behind the veil, suddenly we're like, you question everything. And that's one of the really big things about what you can call maybe this like collective awakening. There's many different terms that people have been giving, but I think that is sort of this deeper questioning of narratives that's going on collectively right now. And it requires that. It requires for discomfort. It requires for just getting outside of your comfort zones. And then also, I'll say especially when it comes to social media, to realizing that the algorithm, people like to say, I built this algorithm brick by brick. And it's like, okay, maybe, but you also built it moment by moment with your attention, and it knows you very well. So it is not going to very likely consciously, give you things that are going to really allow for you to have a certain level of growth and move forward in new ways. It's going to just give you what it is that it thinks will capture your attention. And so it's really being aware of that. I've had a number of conversations with people with that lately. Is they will be looking. I'm sure that politics have a similar thread all around the world where people are like, okay, there's a divisive nature to it. There's this us versus them nature. But in the United States, it seems like it's getting more and more divisive. And I'll talk to a number of people that will say they more so affiliate with one side politically. They will not be able to understand at all how people on the other side will think differently than them. But what they're seeing is that they're seeing different bits of information. So they are responding differently to different bits of information, but the two sides think that they are responding differently to the same information. So that's where one side will think we are really kind and compassionate, the other side is evil. Because they think that they're responding to the same piece of information. But oftentimes it's not. It's catered to what will hold that individual's attention. So it's realizing that when people forget that, which is it's easy to forget, especially when you're in the heat of the moment. But what so often happens is people then they will create a divide with other people. But there's also this divide within themselves. When we have a sense of almost like this binary thinking or this duality in our own thought process, we will oftentimes maybe attribute certain traits and characteristics of ourself as good or bad. And then before we know it, we are really applying a more dogmatic thinking to ourselves. And then we're also then wondering, how did we stray so far? And what are we even doing? And what do we even believe? And all of these different things come up until people then have this like come to Jesus moment, this shattering. And then they're like, okay, let me try to start again. And I think it's what many people are experiencing right now.
A great example for people who just don't really want to be that aware of new information is actually Germany at the moment. We are beginning to see the shimmer of a big division between the far, far right and the far, far left, because nobody really wants to talk to the other side anymore. That is at least what I feel in the last few months. And I think a lot of it has to do with the word that you already said, comfort zone. You have all your beliefs and they are in your comfort zone, perfectly aligned on your shelf. And when you get new information that clashes with this ideology or this opinion, then you begin to see a crack in most safe zone of your life. And I think that a lot of people, at least me, begin to fear that their comfort zone is at risk. When I'm always aware of there could be new information, everything I know could be wrong tomorrow, there would not be any home. Or I would never feel like I'm at home, quite honestly.
Well, I think this would be is what's wise to, I think it's helpful to connect then with your values, right? Because information, by the very nature of information is designed to change. We are designed to change. We are designed to evolve. But maybe what are the components of ourself that are unchanging, that are unwavering? Maybe it's more so your values. So it doesn't actually matter if science changes on something, if you are still connected to your values, you are still connected to what matters to you. And oftentimes, even when you think you're having a disagreement with somebody, but you come together from a space of values and also trying to find that commonality, you quickly realize that, oh, you two are actually much more on the same team, on the same page than you previously realized or would have assumed based on the information that you previously were leading on. So therefore, when we just kind of allow for ourselves to also have a little bit more of a beginner's mindset, right? The importance of asking, like oftentimes questions are more important than answers because answers oftentimes will keep you boxed in. You think, hey, there's a sense of finality to it. You don't need to keep learning. You don't need to keep searching, but instead you're just, well, this is what it is. And then if you're going to find comfort in this is what it is, it's going to keep you in a more fixed mindset as well versus growth, which is what I believe no matter what somebody, I think everybody most people will agree in some component, whatever it means we came here to grow. In some regard, we all came here to grow. We came here to evolve. And the very nature of growth and evolution is discomfort. I have this memory of me, I think I must have been, I don't know how old I was, but I don't even know, 6 or 7. And I remember I'm laying on the floor in my old houses and I was just holding onto my leg, my femur bone, because it hurt so bad because it was growing. So literal growing pains. I was growing like a baby horse at that time and my legs were just killing. But now I look back and I'm really glad that I didn't push a stop button on that. I'm so glad that I allowed for that discomfort to move forward, and we all have to be mindful of that, of the pain, the discomfort that comes with growth and with evolution. And it's also, I've heard a number of creators online will say something about being cringe will set you free. So the idea of be willing to make a mistake, be willing to look maybe stupid is a really important part in our evolution. I think there's actually something to be said if you can never look back on a time in your life when you're like, ooh, that wasn't my best. Kind of like, did you really grow? Because nobody comes out perfect.
All the time.
When you're like,
the time.
Oh my God, what was I doing?
Yeah.
It's important. We all have those, and that's what really connects us. It's such a deeply human experience, and I think that's something else that we have to be mindful of is to err is to be human, right? So to feel uncomfortable is to be human, and I believe that is becoming more important since we have things like AI technology that's coming on, that humans will no longer be the smartest, the brightest. We will not have the highest IQ. No baby born right now will ever know of a world where a human has a higher IQ than artificial intelligence, right?
Wow.
But yet here we are, still really finding our value in our mind. Look at how good I am at recalling information. Look at how good I am at piecing together theses.
Wow, that broke me apart, actually, right there. Wow, no baby is going to experience a world without AI. That is crazy to think about, especially when you have your parents telling you, yeah, back in my days we didn't have any phones or anything. We needed to make appointments for our meetings. And just now thinking, wow, I got old. and on the other side, something is really happening at the moment. And you do that every day with helping companies, startups, everybody who needs it to transform for the future, to be well set, to handle stuff that changes. There are still skeptic voices out there in the science that still say we don't really have AI at the moment. I'm personally someone who definitely thinks that AI is here after the last IQ test they did and everything. So it will definitely begin. And there are people who are worrying and there are people who are still in disbelief. I think that these are just the only two quarters. Of course, there are people who are understanding it and everything, but the majority at the moment, most of them are worrying about their jobs. Most of them are worrying that their kids don't have any jobs anymore. And others are just worrying for world destruction like they saw in Terminator and everything. When you now go to a company and they tell you, we are still doing everything on paper, please help us and everything, how does it normally go? Because, of course, they need a beginner mindset. And how do you shift someone who is for maybe a century in the business to get more modern?
Well, I first just like to get clear with people on their actual processes, on their systems. A lot of businesses, people just kind of do things. They don't really know why they do it or when they're doing it or how they're doing it. They just do it. So it's important to first, especially when we're going to now maybe incorporate some AI technology or some systems work, is to take a little bit of time to first get clear on your processes, so that then when your processes, from there now you have a better understanding of what's working, what's not working, what's actually, bringing in the greatest benefit, what's not bringing in anything at all. Now from here, what would be great to do faster, more efficient? Now, what are some ways in which we can do these things more efficiently, and all these benefits, but in ways that do not really kind of like cannibalize a human. Instead, they're actually allowing for humans to like amplify their human advantage. And that is what I think when we look at even like the future of the world, there's always these like two different pathways that we can see play out. One is this more utopian and one is more dystopian. And it comes down to, I believe, the intentionality that humans have with this technology, and then also how well are you using this technology to amplify you, like the human elements of you, the things that AI cannot do. And something really an easy way to look at that is what are the things that AI can do that that we cannot do as well? And what are the things that the other way around? What are the things that it cannot do that like only we can do? Those are the things that we really need to be leaning into. And when you look at any of the technological revolutions in history, it always required humans to develop a new set of strengths, skills, attributes, characteristics. And you think way back when there was the agricultural revolution, then humans had to become really strong. And there was all of these different ones throughout there. And this one that we're here now, it is not about the intellect. It is not about our ability to memorize and recall information. So what is it about then? What is it requiring of us? Well, this is like the big question right now, but we are going to have a lot of work around really redefining our values of what it means to be a human, what makes a human valuable, what all of these things that seem like they can seem esoteric or they can seem kind of gross. These are all important conversations for people to start having. Because like we just said, with a baby born now will never know a life when humans are smarter than technologies, but smarter in terms of intellect, intellectual processing, cognitive power. That's not really what makes a human. However, it is something that has been very important for us, especially for these last, really since after the Renaissance era. Had the more industrial era. So I know I'm kind of jumping all around now, but in terms of businesses, first get clear on what it is you're doing, what you want to do better, and how you can then use technology to do that. But be mindful of all the deeper meanings and the reasons behind how humans can help amplify everything. Because that's really going to be an important thing going forward. A simple way to look at that is, when you have to call customer support, and you're given like the robot, and you're like,
yeah.
Representative. You're like,
yeah.
People, as of right now, people trust humans more than a not human. And there's that human element. So that's something when I'm working with teams, I help as well teams get clear on what it is they're doing, what they can do better, what systems can be incorporated to help expedite, speed up the entire process. But how do we do it in such a way that is human first? So that's something different I do than I find a lot of people, I've seen people say, they have like an AI first system. And I'm like, to me, I believe the future is deeply human. It is human in a way that we have not ever experienced because it is requiring different traits and characteristics from humanity. And they're the most vulnerable parts of ourselves. So getting back to the importance of feeling feeling uncomfortable, maybe feeling scared, is we feel discomfort and we feel scared when there's this vulnerability. So that's where a lot of times people, the tendency, we find safety in our ideas. We get scared and we go up to our head. But we'll go up to our head to try to solve problems. However, that's not the thing that is going to actually move us forward. We have to be in our bodies. We have to be connecting as humans. We have to be able to have important discussions. We have to be willing to feel our feelings. We need to be able to express, to emote, to create, to share compassion, empathy, warmth, all of these deeply human traits and characteristics. And a lot of companies right now, they're really trying to be these first movers, these quick adapters when it comes to adopters when it comes to AI technology. A lot of them are doing it just because they don't want to seem like they're going to be late to the party. They're not really sure of why or how to do it in such a way. And then oftentimes they end up having to hire people back and redo entire systems because they didn't have an actual framework to follow.
And I have a bit of an other perspective on that because, there are early movers, but in my opinion, they are doing the right thing, not with costing people jobs or anything, but in the next 10 years, there's just this quote that in the next 10 years, we will have more innovation than in the last 100. And thinking about that, this all started with AI and it will just get crazier and scarier every single year. That doesn't only mean that you will have a lot to work for the next years, but also everything will get faster and faster. And we as human race now need, like you said, to connect, still stay with our empathetic side and don't treat people like they're robots or like lives are nothing worth. But we need to do it way faster than ever before. And I think that is one of the greatest challenges that we are actually facing right now. So a lot of early movers are doing some wrong things. For instance, my bank is using only AI for the telephone, so also for the credit card and everything. It took me actually 6 minutes just to get someone to do one click on their computer to open a new card for me. That is insane to think about in this day and age. And here we are, and especially you, and that's why I find it so fascinating what you are doing. You help those lost and stranded people who are just completely overwhelmed with what's already happening at the starting line of the next 10 years.
Yes, it's in many ways what I do is it's very simple, but I have all these different approaches and things because what happens when I start working with somebody, say I'm working with a founder or an executive, they'll come to me and we'll first get clear on their goals and their values. So then we'll see where's like the challenges between those. Like for a simple one would be if somebody's, their goal is to, own X amount of companies, but they really value time freedom. And you're like, well, okay, we have to. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but without maybe really working through those, your subconscious is likely going to set up a lot of blocks. And there's seven different systems within our subconscious mind that essentially are all sending out different alarms that are blocking us in certain ways. So once we get clear on what those are, the values and the goals, then we'll get clear on the hiccups, the discrepancies between the two, and how can we mend those gaps. And this is then where we'll look to some of these systems that I use that, they're all different names. We can call them pseudoscience, whatever. To me, I think it's just different ways of us to gather intel and information. Essentially, it's advanced pattern recognition, I believe is what it is. Systems like astrology, and then human design and gene keys, which are all similar systems, but they help us pull different information and data about potentially how an individual can move forward. And what people quickly realize is it almost seems as if some part of themselves was already kind of following these systems, but it was an energy, something that happened so much more unconsciously. So the idea of how do we get out of our own way is oftentimes to allow for ourselves to do what it is that we are naturally going to do. Like so one example would be it is like every 27, well, once you have your first one, it's every 27 years you have something that's called a progressed new moon. And never fail. It is, I can even ask people about these certain periods of like, hey, when this happened, or it's coming up soon. There's like this shift, this massive shift in their life. And it could be something that, they orchestrated or was orchestrated for them, but either way, it was like this clear before and after. So if some part of you is aware that there is this shift that is like right around the corner, to think, well, how could maybe the more conscious parts be interacting with that? Or something else is when I had that whole dark night of the soul that I had beginning of 2020. That was actually right when transit Pluto, so Pluto, the one that's like going around the sky right now, was right when it crossed over my sun and Venus in my natal chart. So I'm not familiar how familiar you are with the natal chart, but it's a snapshot of the sky the moment that you were born. It's where all the planets are, and you have a zodiac wheel, and there's these 12 different areas in your chart, representative of 12 different areas in your life, and you have all these planets, and it's like this big recipe. You have the different ingredients and all of this, and it can seem so external until you begin just to allow for yourself to even question, like, oh, if this were to be true for you, like, what would this mean? And you're like, oh, well, and suddenly you're asking yourself new questions that's bringing you into a deeper understanding about your emotional needs, your dislikes, your challenges, your strengths. So when I had that dark night of the soul, it was right when Pluto crossed over my sun, and Pluto has a 248-year orbit, so it's very rare, but that's one of those other things that when I look at somebody's chart and I see that they had that, because not everybody gets that, but when you do, I can very clearly, never fail. I can say, so tell me about, 2013, or tell me about that. And typically they come right out with it, or they'll be like, what do you mean? How do you know about that? Or what thing about it? And it fascinates me. So we use these systems not to tell you who it is that you are, but to allow for you to maybe have a deeper relationship with yourself, because you see that in some shape, way, or form, you're right on track. You are right on track, right where you're supposed to be. Everything you're going through is in some way almost kind of orchestrated. And maybe it has nothing to do with the actual planets. Rather, it's that these planetary cycles are timed up with different cycles and patterns in our physical reality that are just outside of our conscious awareness. And for a very long time, I was really kind of hung up on like the logic behind it. I wanted to really understand it. And I'm like, that's like a first way ticket to crazy town. If you're like trying to solve nonstop the biggest mysteries of the universe, instead, it's allow for yourself to be like, this seems to be useful. This seems to be helping. This seems to be doing something in the right directions. Maybe I don't need to have all of the specifics of it, but I can just kind of trust that there's something here. But trust goes with vulnerability. So a lot of people, they are very uncomfortable with these types of systems because they can't understand it. And as we discussed at the beginning of our conversation, a lot of times people think, if I can understand something, like, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot, though, that we can't understand. And that's a really important part of us moving forward back into a type of Renaissance era as well.
Yeah, I'm actually one of those people who are very skeptic about the whole astrology thing, because...
I think we should be. We should be. You shouldn't just take anything at face value ever. Ever. Ever.
Yeah, it's just, there is stuff that you are growing up with, and I think astrology was never a big part about it. Actually, because in Germany we don't really, the majority don't really believe in it, first of all. And when I look up to the stars and I see the little dragon or any other sign, and or I look through a telescope and see Saturn, for instance, I find it very, very beautiful. I find it crazy to believe how far away those things are. But at the same time, it also means when I get deeper in stuff like astrology and our subconscious mind, I start to believe that I'm no longer in control of things. When I say, okay, there's this universe, it orchestrates me, then I could go onto the street, murder someone, and say, yeah, it's just the universe that orchestrated it for me. And for my part, at the moment, it's a bit too easy without an explanation that my evidence at the moment is not strong enough against it.
Oh no, absolutely. I don't look to these systems in lieu of free will. Rather, I view, even when I view systems like astrology, I view it through the lens of correlation, not causation. So, I'll give you a few examples. So it was in 2018, I told a few people, I was looking at the charts of the next few years, and I told the people, I said, whoa, something crazy is going to happen. The beginning of 2020 is going to change the world forever. The markets are going to collapse. Governments are going to go crazy. It's going to change the world forever. But I said it so kind of just nonchalantly because I was just like, oh, wow, that's crazy. I wonder what it's going to be. Anyways, obviously we knew what came forth. But then when I was studying deeper into, because that was a certain cycle that was happening during the beginning of 2020, we had Pluto and Saturn in a conjunction. They actually had a conjunction right on top of my sun, which is why this whole thing is the full circle moment. But for me, unfortunately, but it was, that would be a really big, it's a very sort of like a malefic type of aspect. It doesn't cause, but I believe it there's some signaling. So when you look back at that cycle, so Pluto has a 248-year orbit to go point to the same point, and then Saturn is between 29 to 30 years. So it's roughly like every, because they're both moving, then it's roughly like every 29, 28 years that those two will have, they come into a point. And when you look back at those periods, there seems to always be, as far back as I've gone, there's some type of like, whoa, like, it can seem deeply malefic or troublesome. Almost there's kind of this like energy, like an outbreak that kind of takes place. And it doesn't mean that those two planets coming into that place is what caused it. I think that there's just certain cycles and timings going on in our reality, and we do not, as of right now, have the awareness of what those are. But I think that it's just that there's this different kind of level of intelligence that we consciously, cognitively, as our current human, we're not attuned for it from an understanding, or maybe we understand it, but just not from an intellectual place. So that'd be one of those examples where somebody were to go and do something crazy and cruel. It wouldn't be that it's in your chart, but maybe there was something indicated in, I don't know, in potentially you're going through there was some correlation that could have been occurring. But either way, it's never about, I'll say no, even though I'm going to scratch all of that, because I'll say there's never something in your chart that is indicated as purely bad. Everything comes down to the energy. The energy is then like, how do you use it? How do you use it? So when I look back to that experience I had when I had Pluto question for my son, it brought all of this stuff, all of these like fears almost made manifest. I ended up getting a stalker. I had all of these crazy things that happened to me right around that time, but essentially it was all of the subconscious fears seemingly kind of came forth in a very short period of time for me. And it could have been that instead of that, if I had maybe already been more mindful of my fears and my boundaries, that period instead could have translated into, some type of really powerful move I made in my life. But instead it was really just looking at it through the lens of, oh, this is what's being signaled. How are you going to make use of it. And that's the same way that I look at when I'm looking at even these larger collective cycles. So one of the things that really drew me to your podcast was the name of it, because I always say that one of the main things I do with my clients is I help them decode what's next and then recode to shape it. So we're recoding our identities, our systems, our operations, our nervous system to be able to understand, okay, these are the opportunities, the good, the bad, everything in between. But what are we going to do with it? So similar to anything, when you look at a financial crisis, there are some people that make almost all of their money during periods of financial crises, right? So again, it's not about the good or the bad. It's how do you utilize the energies? How do you utilize the opportunities? And it's just like that. That's how I view everything, really, in terms of here's what's coming in. But also, here's your strengths, here's your gifts, here's your challenges. How can we help you put all of that to use? How can you use what's coming in to create greater impact, to create more security?
My pretty much last question on astrology, because I didn't have anybody yet here that knew anything about it, and I hope you're really not mad at me for asking the question, but in my mind, what does stop me to just go out on a cornfield, point into the sky to 3 stars that I just like right now and say, those stars indicate I will be rich in the next year? Because at the end of the day, it's humans who gave those planets, those stars, those correlations and everything, they gave them meaning. And that's a bit my problem part at the moment.
Well, typically when, so you look at a lot of times when maybe there was a certain planet that, so a couple things. One is a lot of times when certain planets or maybe asteroids, they are discovered, the meaning behind them through the lens of something astrological or consciousness related is given or is determined by the energies that were going on at that time period. But also when we're looking at something like astrology, I view astrology as it's an observational science. So when you think about it through that lens, that for millennia, there have been people looking up at the same sky, and then from there, they have been gathering information and insights from these. And if you think about that, just the evolution of the human brain and us staring at these stars, that I don't know if for the most part of when it was, who was like, okay, Jupiter represents this. The newer, some of the newer ones, the more recently discovered, there's a correlation with the things at that time. Like Pluto was discovered around the time when we had the atomic bomb and all of that. So Pluto, the Plutonian energy isn't associated with like destructive, powerful forces. But when you look at these planets that have been, known about for a very long time, a lot of that goes back to just these certain correlations and meanings that have been drawn and built upon. And that's why I do not attribute it as much to the actual location of the planets. Rather, to me, it's just this cycle, this timing technique. And also for me, it's one thing that it's proven, for me, there's many instances when it's proven valuable and helpful. And I think there's there's a saying that I heard somebody say, something along the lines of, like not all frameworks are true, but some are useful. And when we think about that, it's like, okay, well, what is actually helpful for you? If something is proving no benefit, no value, and it's causing problems, throw that thing away immediately. But if you're using something and you're like, this is helping me kind of be more of myself or be a better version of myself. It's helping me think deeper, ask better questions. Cool. And that's where it's how can we allow for ourselves to lean into something even if we can't fully understand it consciously. Because again, this ties in with when we're looking at AI technology coming in. AI technology is going to be the most intellectually genius and astute with the processing and cognition and all of that. So it's like, who are we trying to compete with? So that doesn't mean throw away your thinking, throw away your judgment. Of course not. But rather it's, what can you tune into? I love to watch now I live more in nature. So there's lots of wild animals, and there's like regular forest animals in the States. There's like bear and deer and like little crawly guys, stuff like that. But I love and I'm fascinated by when I'll watch these animals, especially deer, because they are so connected. It's instinctually, but I also I think it's something, it's like this emotional, not intelligence in the way in which we're used to hearing emotional intelligence. It's like this emotional attunement. I will watch this like group of them go by, and I'll have my dog, he'll be snoring away on the porch. He doesn't see them, he doesn't hear them. I see the neighbor's dogs, they're quiet. And it's not until the deer are about like 5 minutes away that then all the dogs freak out. And I was like, how do they do that? How are these deer moving in stealth mode? And what it is they do, that they move in such a way that they're, I guess, going with the wind. So they're down, would they be upwind? I don't know. I'm not a deer. I wouldn't be able to do that. But they travel in such a way to where like they don't give themselves away. So it's like there's this incredible intelligence. It's not somebody could easily say, oh, well, that's just animals and their instincts. But I'm like, there's a certain level of brilliance to that, right? And it's not going to be the same IQ. There's this attunement. And I'll see this with other birds. Birds that won't seem to be together, and they'll all kind of stop chirping at the same time, and then they'll pick back up again. You'll hear it with bugs. There's like this rhythm and this frequency in nature. And there's something that all of nature is connected with in a way that we love, and that's why we go to the ocean, we go to the beach, we go in nature, we love it, but we don't quite get it, right? And it was last year, right around this time, there was a really big tropical storm in Asheville, where I live. Lots of flooding. It was a really big deal, and we had the water was all out, and cell towers were down, and power was down for a very long time. But the cell towers were down for about, I don't remember, it was like 5 days. And that was weird. It was like I was like totally a frontier woman. I was out in the woods. Didn't have my cell phone working. But as soon as they came on in like the middle of the night. I woke up to my phone lighting up because it was my sister texting me. I heard that the cell towers came back on because she was at the hospital, but she asked me, is it true? But right at that time, when the phone lit up, the dogs, I had a couple dogs staying with me because watching people's dogs, they started barking. There was no sound that went off, but they attuned to this frequency shift of all of the cell towers coming back on simultaneously. So that just showed me that something that possibly disconnects us from nature maybe is these technologies, which do grant us incredible things, but there's definitely a difference. I think about that often. It was without a doubt, the animals were barking at that frequency shift coming back on. And it just, once again, it's one of those things that animals are attuned to that we are not. But many would argue that intellectually, humans have faster processing and all of that, right? But there's a different type of intelligence that animals have.
And it couldn't have been a squirrel or anything out there.
No, because it was right at that time. Both of them, because I had my sister's two dogs were staying with me. It was a very crazy time. Those dogs were silent. They were silent for so long because it was weird. The animals were all stressed out, and right at that moment, and like Scout's honor, that happened, and it was fascinating to me. But it just shows that there is a frequency. There's a frequency that something got activated, and it was all the cell towers for this entire western region all came back on. So I'm sure it was a jolt of some type of electricity, but nothing that I heard, but yet they did. So they're attuned to things more much differently. And so that's one of the things I think of in this going forward with us, and is how can we allow for ourselves to maybe attuned a little bit differently. So this is going to be, how can we allow for ourselves to notice the subtleties, notice more of these, an emotional intelligence. It's looking into the silence, looking into the space between the words. The body language is not just like words. It's the deeper meaning. And that's when something that's like gives a form of intelligence, emotional intelligence is like the deeper, the nuance. So if we think about that with us, it's the nuance. And if you think about what we were discussing in the beginning of this conversation of, people not wanting to have their ideas challenged, it's life is, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of
Mm,
nuance to everything. And for us to be able to move forward in a more holistic manner as to how can we hold maybe two sides of the stick? How can we, maybe it's not about either or, it's both and. One of the reasons really important to, I believe, is to allow for you to connect with maybe less linear, less logical, even through the lens of what we're used to, systems and intelligences, is that we are moving back into a type of Renaissance era.
hmm
When you look back in history, the Renaissance era was really 14th century, 17th century, and what was replaced, and the Renaissance era was then replaced by the more modern industrial era. So the Renaissance era was more artistic, more creative. There were people that were artists and scientists that were studying anatomy and technology and art and all of this, right? This very non-linear, very multifaceted, multidisciplinary approach, to where then the industrial era was about streamlining processes, efficiency, and a lot of niching things down. And when you
hmm
look at even how that's affected as a society, we're much more systemized. We have had a tendency to pathologize maybe individuals' eccentricities and uniquenesses, and to really, like, you got to fit into a box. We have to have you do certain things a certain way. So that is deeply homogenized and deeply tribal. So potentially, I believe what we are moving back into is a Renaissance era, again, of sorts. Not in the same way, but in a way that is going to be about using technology in a way that is fused with creativity, is fused with systems and things and ways of thinking that maybe we do not right now consciously, cognitively understand. But it's really important to be able to blend different systems. And this is as well, you think about me, how we do something, but then how we do work or how we move forward in our life, but also in the idea of how do we allow for ourselves to be kind of almost to have a more multifaceted identity, more of an identity stack, right? You do this, and this. And it's not about what you do, rather, it's about how you do all that it is that you do. And that is what is really going to allow for individuals to have their own unique signature, the uniqueness that is you, how you do things differently, and things that only you can do.
To lead your own life. And we got
Mm-hmm.
leaders everywhere. You lead your own
Mm-hmm.
life, especially if
Yeah.
you watch or listen to this podcast. But we have leaders in the companies and the startups, everything as well. What needs to be the key traits? Maybe only the three most important traits, besides, of course, being open for new information and everything, and always keeping an open mind. What are the three key traits that every leader will need in the next 5 years?
And say resiliency. It's like an emotional attunement. We're going to be hearing words kind of like that become more prevalent. I'll get into that in a minute. And then I'll say, trying to decide between curiosity and creativity. I think they're probably both really similar when you zoom out. And it's
Okay.
just to allow for yourself to be able to be incredibly resilient, but to also be very adaptable. So that's where that, I think, that emotional attunement and resiliency comes in, to be able to allow for yourself to, okay, pivot. Something happened, you're getting new information, and you're able to not be so rigid in your processes, thought processes, or any type of processes as well. You're allowing for yourself to be able to quickly pivot and move and just approach something differently. And then the curiosity, the creativity. So that's really having a open, growth oriented mindset. And one of these systems that I use, try to have this be as basic as I can explain it here, so I don't lose people and seeming like I'm being too woo here. But in this system, one of them that I use is called human design. In human design, it fuses the chakras and quantum physics and astrology and these different systems together to allow for us to have a better understanding of kind of like our own individual mechanics, how we have certain characteristics and traits and how we can best make decisions for ourselves. And so also shows us how we come together. And through the lens of this system, it is thought that for the last, well, 410 years, but the 410 years is ending in February in 2027 is when we are shifting, thought to be we're shifting into this new kind of mode of operating. And for the last 400 years through this system, it's that we have been more tribal. So the idea of a lot of our needs being met came through the tribe. And it really was around our belonging came through the tribe. And with one of those, though, my dog's okay,
Okay.
jumping off a couch right behind me, so it was hard to be loud. Okay. Um, Within the system, there's these some 7 different, almost like connectors that connect us as a society, these locks that connect us as a society. And one of them pertains to leadership in terms of how we think about leadership. And for through the lens of this system, the energy that unlocked the leader was that of logic and details and facts. And so essentially it would be the leader in this case was the one who had the facts, the stats, the data, who was able to lead from intellect. But moving forward, again, through this system, that energy is going to be unlocked by the one who is able to be calm and activate a new beginning. And typically, beginnings come after endings, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily mean anything, crazy in terms of anything horrible happening, but rather it's about who is the one that's able to say, okay, that may have been the way that things were done for a long time, but just because they were done that way for a long time doesn't mean that that was the best way, the right way, the fairest way. So who's going to be the one that can come in and lead from a space where they're able to actually be calm, be able to hear people out, be able to get people on board with something new? That's a different type of leader.
Wow. Ashley Mosaic, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for all the insights and all the different topics. I had really a great time. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Where can people get in touch with you or get you to know a bit,
So it's
to know you a bit better?
Yeah, ashleymosaic.com or Ashley Mosaic on social media. I'm there, lots of different information. I do my best to synthesize a lot of these larger topics. Some of them are dealing with foresight, and some of them are dealing with more of these ancient systems. And I love it when people just have they allow for themselves to dip their toe in that curiosity that they naturally have. We all were little kids once, and little kids are so deeply creative and curious. So once we allow for ourselves to reconnect with that, it seems that we're tapping into something magical.